Hello, friends. As you can see, ecstatic Buddhism interprets Buddhism or Buddhist doctrine in some pretty radically different ways in which the mainstream forms of Buddhism express it. The most fundamental difference between us is that we interpret the fruit of the contemplative life radically differently than how mainstream Buddhism interprets it. For instance, as you saw in the earlier videos, mainstream Buddhism tends to interpret samadhi and jhana as merely concentration, which is a cognitive activity, which is what we call the practice of meditation. Whereas ecstatic Buddhists interpret samadhi and jhana as ecstatic, altered states of consciousness that are transcendental and are characterized by bliss, joy, and ecstasy. Now, we support our premise by looking at the original Pali Canon, the Sutta Pitaka, the Pali Canon, which is the discourses of the Buddha in the earliest language that was expressed in. And there we see ecstatic languages being used. And those key terms are basically piti and sukha. Piti is generally translated as bliss, and sukha is generally translated as joy. So we argue that how can it possibly be concentration if bliss and joy is present? If you concentrate on your homework, or you can experience bliss and joy. Maybe some people do, but most people don't. Okay, so then, and then in the case of vipassana, which is generally translated as insight, now we accept the translation of it as insight. The problem is most mainstream Buddhists interpret insight as purely another cognitive activity of just being self-aware, mindful, and so forth. They actually conflate it with the practice of meditation again. So here they're conflating samadhi and jhana with the practice of meditation, and they're conflating vipassana with the practice of meditation, which to us is a profound blurring of the seventh and eighth fold of the Noble Eightfold Path, because the seventh fold of the Noble Eightfold Path is defined by the Buddha in 4 key suttas as the practice of meditation. And samadhi is defined as the eighth fold of the Noble Eightfold Path, and he defines it in ecstatic terms. So if you interpret samadhi as merely concentration, well, now you've made the seventh fold of the Noble Eightfold Path equal to the eighth fold of the Noble Eightfold Path. And, okay, so then if vipassana or insight is interpreted purely as self-awareness or mindfulness, or whatever term your meditation teacher, mainstream meditation teacher, wants to interpret it, again, we look at that as a conflating or blending of the fruits of the contemplative life with the practices that they're supposed to lead to the fruit. We believe the whole thing about the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path was it was supposed to lead somewhere, and that somewhere was transcendental or transformative, and it involved intuitive revelatory insight, which is how we interpret vipassana. And it also led to ecstatic altered states of consciousness, which is how we interpret samadhi. And then it led to other things too, like out-of-body experiences. The Buddha described it as the result of his Noble Eightfold Path. Most Buddhist meditation teachers dismiss these phenomena. Now, the terms that are used in the suttas are Magga and Phala. Magga is a Pali term, and it means path or practice. So the key terms here are Magga and Phala, which are translated by most translators as path versus fruit. Magga is path or practice. And Phala means fruit. And in this case, the way it's used in the suttas is not as something that you eat, sweet that you eat from a tree, but fruit as in attainment. And so clearly the suttas indicate that following the Noble Eightfold Path, it would lead to fruit. And in fact, in the Anapanasati Sutta, there's a term called Mahaphala, which, I translate as superior fruit or superior attainment. And according to that stanza towards the beginning of the Anapanasati Sutta, it means, he's saying by following Anapanasati, which is the meditation upon the breath, then one will arrive at superior attainment. And superior attainment, or Phala, is defined in the second sutta in the Digha Nikaya, DM2, and it's known as the Sambhapala Sutta. And there we have ecstatic altered states of consciousness defined, which is samadhi and jhana. We have intuitive revelatory insight described, and we have out-of-body experiences, and we have other things too, like equanimity and tranquility, which, by the way, according to the suttas, are the product of attaining jhana. Whereas mainstream Buddhism does not tend to recognize that tranquility and equanimity come from the attainment of jhana. So, to us, ecstatic Buddhists, mainstream Buddhism does not recognize attainment at all, whereas we do. We're all about attainment. We're all about leading a contemplative life rather rigorously for the express purpose of fulfillment or, attainment or arriving at Phala. Without Phala, without attainment, the Noble Eightfold Path or the contemplative life to us is meaningless. Why lead a contemplative life if it doesn't lead to tranquility, equanimity, insight, which is intuitive and revelatory, and ecstatic altered states of consciousness, which are blissful and joyful. And according to the Buddha, the fourth jhana was his definition of being relieved from the suffering, which is what the Four Noble Truths is all about. So, to fulfill that Four Noble Truths function, that suffering exists and there's a cause for suffering and there's a way out of our suffering, that way out of our suffering, according to the Buddha, as expressed in the Sutta Pitaka, the Pali Canon, is arriving at the fourth jhana. Thank you, friends.